All right, good morning once again. Good to see everybody. As you may have figured out, we have a guest speaker this morning. It's an old friend, Don Veinot. I've known Don for many years. He's a good brother, faithful servant of God. And he is going to be sharing with us a very important message, but also something that's coming up, a conference that he is putting on, and he'll talk to us more about that. But may God just really stir our hearts by what Don's about to bring to us, because I tell you, it's a very important subject in these dark days in which we're living. So, Don, come on up.
Introduce your ministry, so you have to do that. Well, I'll do that, and it is true that we're friends, and it is also true that I'm old, so I guess I would be an old friend. That'd be true. And I am the president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., and we hail from Wonder Lake, Illinois these days, but we also have a branch in Florida and Quincy, Illinois. The smart guys hang out there, and I call them to ask the big questions. Actually, we have a really good team, and we're blessed by that. In addition, I am the current president of another organization called Evangelical Missions to Non-Christian Religions, EMNR, which is a coalition or consortium of ministries kind of like ours. Some specialize in groups like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or something. Others have come out of occultism. I was speaking with a couple of individuals as they're asking about demons and things. Her name is Ivani Greppi. She was a priestess, an Umbanda priestess, which she's from Brazil, but does originally actually starts in West Africa. And it happens that the Udo Ifa, which is where that comes from, is the religion of Black Lives Matters. And so she's just kind of a denomination from that group. Pretty interesting stuff. So it's a great organization. And we're passionate about reaching unbelievers, cults, non-Christian religions, atheists, whatever. We like to talk to all of them. And our annual conference is here in Palatine this year, August 15 and 16. This is one of the churches that's helping us to get the word out. We recommend you come. If you're at all interested, you'll be blessed. We'd like you to sign up so we can do your name tags, but it is a free will offering. We're not charging anything. Unless you come and stay for dinner and for lunch on Saturday, then we'd like you to sign up and pay for that as well, so we don't have to deal with that. But here's a little promo that'll help you to see it a little bit. There's no noise, guys. Now, the plenary speakers are just top-notch, great. In fact, I was talking about the question of the Trinity. Dr. Rob Bowman is one of the best on that issue. He's one of the plenary speakers. He's also going to be speaking here on the Sunday afterwards, so you'll get two shots at him. Dr. Donald Williams is a philosopher, apologetics, and a poet. So he's an interesting combination, good friend. And if you wondered what a book might look like written by an apologist, philosopher, and poet, his book, 95 Theses for a New Reformation, is the book. You have all of that in there. It's pretty interesting. We have some flyers on the table over there. You can pick one up. And there is a QR code. You can scan that code to take you right to the conference website, or you can do several things. You can see who's going to be there, what the schedule looks like. If you want to join us for dinner or lunch, you can sign, or both, you can sign up for that, so everything's there. And that's that. enjoying it. So how did I get involved with this? Well, the short story is it was a woman God gave me. She became passionate about Jehovah's Witnesses and asked me to help her sort it out. I was a new Christian at the time. I was so biblically illiterate that I go to the Old Testament, and there's this book there, J-O-B. I thought it was a one-ance. I mean, I just didn't know anything. And so I agreed to help her figure this out, and one thing led to another, and then Midwest Christian Outreach came to be. I didn't intend to be a missionary to cults non-Christian religions. I just wanted to be a rich general contractor and support missionaries. But God had different plans for me and for her. After completing my last physical, my doctor was filling out the forms and all of that sort of thing, and just said sort of on the side there, don't eat anything fatty. So I need to clarify things because I'm kind of a rule keeper. So what does that mean to me? And I asked, what, no bacon, no sausages, burgers, cheeseburgers, or anything like that? And he responded, no, fatty, don't eat anything. Clarifying questions and definitions are important, both in physical health and in spiritual health. Too often, we don't ask the right questions. Maybe we don't know the right questions. Sometimes, just getting educated and knowing what is going on can help us to then help provoke someone else to ask good questions. The incarnation, life, death, physical resurrection, and ascension of Jesus provided salvation for those who would believe. The Gospel of John, that's the theme. It was written that you may believe. John was writing against two cults, many don't realize that were extant at the time. Ebionites, which denied the pre-existence of Christ, and Docetists, which denied the physical incarnation of Christ. And you see it in the first 14 verses when he says, in the beginning, he points to Genesis. In the beginning was the Word. So before anything was created, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. There you go, Ebionites. He already existed. And then in verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He was physical. And you see those two themes all the way through the Gospel of John. Why? Because the church had been buying into false teaching that was infiltrating the church by false teachers who were denying the biblical teachings on the nature of man, the nature of God, and the nature of salvation. We have a similar thing going on today. Now that has served as sort of a guardrail for civilization since about 300 or so years after the resurrection. Over a 300-year period, the disciples of the Lord, those who came to faith, Jews and Gentiles, that were born again in a pagan culture, transformed the society to a Judeo-Christian worldview, morality and ethics. And it answered the main four questions all of us have. Where did I come from? Origins. Meaning, why am I here? Morality, why should I live any particular way at all? Destiny, what happens after I die? All of us have those four basic questions, and we're trying to answer them, and we do that through all sorts of ways. We try different religious ideas, philosophies. Mostly we do it based on how we feel about things, which is not a good judge of those kinds of issues. But this morning we're going to go back a little farther even than the first century. We wouldn't have Western culture if it wasn't for the church, which we'll get into. But before that, other things happened. I love history. I love the Old Testament because of the history involved there. It is a very Jewish book from Genesis 12 until Acts 10. It's a very Jewish book, and we kind of miss that. But it tells us some interesting things pre-Judaism. That starts in Genesis chapter 10, where we find what is often referred to as the Table of Nations. This, Genesis 10, gives us a setting of where the nations came from. Who were the descendants of Noah, Japheth, Ham, and Shem? And who were these various tribes and where would they live? God is assigning them. In fact, in Deuteronomy 32 tells us that God assigned them their plots of land even at this time. Their boundaries are going to be here. So this is your nation, this is your nation, this is your nation, and that's where you're supposed to scatter and go. So you have the genealogy. I like genealogies. My wife loves genealogies. She's gone through and she keeps checking to find out who's who in the zoo, kind of in our past history. And she discovered that my family hails from France around the 1600s or so. When they came, they were fleeing. They were Huguenots, French Huguenots. They were fleeing persecution, and they went to Nova Scotia and founded a city called Lunenburg. And if you look on the monument, there's my last name on the monument. It's kind of interesting. And most of them came down through the East Coast, and one of them married an Indian, so I have some Indian blood in my past there. She also discovered that my grandmother's brother was an axe murderer. That was kind of interesting. And we got some info. In fact, we have the newspaper article from that time, what happened and how they chased him around. And from the time the act was committed to the time he was executed was a month. So you didn't have time for 4,700 appeals for your sentence. But it's interesting to have that information. We have other information about this group of people that occurs in the very next chapter of Genesis, which occurs about 2,242 BC, where we witness a united effort by humanity to fulfill their greatest desires. As my friend Carl Tykrib pointed out in his excellent book, Game of Gods, humanity has three great desires. I just passed by that. To be as God, to be masters of meaning and destiny, and to build heaven on earth. That's humanity's biggest goal. I don't really like God that much. I really want to be master of my own meaning. I can do it myself, and I can determine my destiny, and I will build heaven on earth. I will create my own utopia. That's sort of humanity's goal. We even see that in the Garden of Eden, where this kind of began. God's holding back from you. You can be like God, knowing good and evil. All you got to do is take a bite of the fruit. Sounds like a deal to me. And we have been in trouble ever since. In chapter 11, we read this. 11:1 through 5. The whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top into the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth, whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. In those 112 words, we see the plan was to create the temple of man. We don't want God's temple. We want to build the temple of man. We want to build a monument to us. We want a city of our own making, where we can create our own utopia for ourselves. And we don't have to scatter and multiply. We like our town much better than what God might provide for us. They would not disperse, but instead built their own vision of utopia, heaven on earth. However, When it was completed, and notice that because I hear a lot of preachers say he kind of interrupted the construction. He didn't. He waited. God's not in a hurry. And when they got all done, he went and kicked over their building. Sort of. He didn't. He said, confounded the language so they couldn't talk to each other anymore, which caused them to do what? To scatter, like they were supposed to do to begin with. I would have to sometimes tell my daughter when she was younger that there's certain things that she needs to do. And she had a choice. She could do it easy or she could do it hard. But rest assured, you're going to do it. That's kind of true with God. You're going to do what he directs. You can do it easy. You can do it hard. But be sure you're going to do it. So they built an edifice of themselves. He simply confounded the languages which caused them to scatter. The rejection of God and attempted replacement with self-worship and the worship of creation is a constant desire of man. The Apostle Paul outlines this process in the first chapter of Romans, where he writes, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. And they became futile in their thinking. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." Romans 1:19 through 22. So, although many, perhaps most, have grown up in Western culture over the past 1,700 years since Christianity transformed civilization into Western culture, they may not have acted on the gospel or believed in the Lord for salvation. The biblical teachings have served as a sort of ethical and moral guardrail for society. It is present in everything when you look around and think about history. It's in the art, it's in the architecture, it's in most great Christian literature, music, even politics. And science came out of Christian thinking. God created everything from nothing. We don't know how he did that, but we want to know how it works. And that's where science developed from. Christianity affected everything. It was deeply embedded in the Declaration of Independence. And it has lines like this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So you see it even embedded in our founding documents. Were all of the founding fathers Christians? No. Were they influenced by the biblical teachings on our existence? Yes. And they show it there. They were pointing to the imago Dei, the image of God stepped on humans, that man is created in the image of God. This belief was so influenced the guiding of the writing of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Even so, the three great desires of humans were and continue to be as God, to be masters of meaning and destiny, and to build heaven on earth. Over the past 150 years or so, these three great desires have gradually been replacing and leading culture into what we will call the age of re-enchantment, and have begun building the temple of man anew. But we're doing it through spirituality. They're replacing and leading culture in the age of re-enchantment and have begun building the temple of man anew. George Barna points out in American Worldview Inventory 2024 that the current prevailing worldview is Does anybody want to even guess what it is? No, I won't embarrass you. It is syncretism. 92% of the population are syncretists. That means they combine various worldviews and religions together. I was just talking with someone over there, and they said, well, how do we get our understanding? I said, well, most everybody, even in this room, gets their worldview by osmosis. It seeps into our brains. Through the books we read, the films we watch, the movies we watch, the news we watch, the friends we have, it just floats through the air. And we often gather it in unchecked to say, is this true? For a long time, I would go to Cortez, Colorado, would bring me down to teach the churches there over a 4-day weekend, specifically to prepare the high schoolers for college. And we would deal with worldviews. What's a worldview? And I would explain the worldviews, what the possible worldviews are. And then I'd say, now, when we're done with all of this, we're going to have a popcorn and a movie. And you're going to tell me the 3 worldviews in the movie when we're done. Which one's the best, the most true, which one's the worst, and which one's the most honorable. And we watched a film called Hidalgo. It's an interesting film about a race across the Saudi desert. And the 3 worldviews are animism, you got an American Indian, and Buddha and Islam, and Christianity. Guess who was the best worldview? Animism. Who was the most honorable worldview? Islam. Who was the most dishonest worldview? Christianity. Now, as you watch the film, without realizing it, you're imbibing on education about the various worldviews. And you start shaping your thinking about the world around you based on false information. So syncretism. The second most popular worldview is the biblical worldview at a whopping 4%. So syncretism is the prevailing worldview when you walk out the doors there. And people don't realize it because they have bought into and still hold on to Judeo-Christian ethics and morals disconnected from the Bible and God. According to Wikipedia, religious syncretism is the blending of religious belief systems into a new system or the incorporation of other beliefs into an existing religious system. It is something kind of like what Israel did down through their history. As you read the Old Testament, you see repeatedly the Jewish nation continually brought in false gods, false idols. They didn't abandon God, they just added these to their pantheon of deities. And God kept sending prophets, we'll call them missionaries to the household of faith, to call them to repent, get rid of these false ideas, get rid of these false practices, get rid of these false idols, and turn to the God who created everything. We're kind of in the same place today. They borrowed from pagan cultures and just added it to what they're doing. With the worldview at 4% and the prevailing worldview of syncretism, we see the rise of a new religious movement defining itself as, you've heard this, spiritual but not religious. We're spiritual but not religious. We're not committing to anything religiously, but we are spiritual beings, and we're syncretizing, we're borrowing, mixing and matching what makes us feel spiritual. That is what we will be. There's a growing concern not only within churches, but among leading atheists that this is going on. Does that surprise you? For decades, atheists have evangelized against Christianity. All of a sudden, they are defenders of Christianity. They're not Christians. They don't believe in God, but they are concerned about where culture is going. For example, in 2017, Richard Dawkins, anyone heard of Richard Dawkins? Famous atheist. Has been referring to himself as a cultural Christian. Dawkins told Leading Britain's Conversation, it's a British talk show station, quote, "I call myself a cultural Christian," end quote. And he continues with this. I'm not a believer, but there is a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel at home in the ethics of Christianity. I am missing the ethics of Christianity. Why? Because it is going somewhere that I never anticipated and I am concerned about, even as an atheist. Historian and author of Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World, is atheist Tom Holland. I really like his book. I recommend it to every Christian to read. He's still an atheist. But what he does, he goes, I thought the first century was really different than what I discovered that it is. And so it was a mean place. Women were devalued. Children really didn't matter. It was a terrible place as far as society and culture responded. And if it wasn't for Christianity, we wouldn't have Western culture. And he documents that. And it's good because he's also showing the bad parts of the Christian faith down through the generations, saying bad things the church did. But he's saying if we hadn't had Christianity, we wouldn't have Western culture. In a 2016 article, he penned this: I was wrong about Christianity. And he ends with this: today, even as belief in God fades across the West, the countries that were once collectively known as Christendom continue to bear the stamp of the 2 millennia-old revolution that Christianity represents. It is the principal reason why, by and large, most of us who live in post-Christian societies still take for granted that it is nobler to suffer than to inflict suffering. It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, notice what he's picking out? In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian. He attends church regularly. He serves in his church in capacities that he's allowed to do so. And he argues for the need for Christianity. Here's a secret, though. If you reject the God of Christianity, you're not going to hold on to the morals and ethics of Christianity because they have no power on their own. All they can do is convict you of wrongdoing. They can't make you be better. So ultimately, you end up with better behaved sinners, but not as well behaved as God might bring them to be. Note that both of them are still atheists, but have come to realize that the morals and ethics Western culture has lived by is rooted in the Bible. The biblical worldview is losing influence, and people are concerned about what is replacing it. Former atheist, now agnostic mathematician James Lindsay, it's a name you probably haven't heard, you should become familiar with, and atheist professor of philosophy Peter Boghossian. James Lindsay has since become an agnostic. He's not a Christian yet, but he's been shifting. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Peter Boghossian is still an atheist, and they were some of the famous new atheists. And Peter Boghossian, as a philosophy professor, would write books telling atheists how to evangelize Christians. That's what he did. He discovered something really interesting as he and James came out against social justice and wokeism. They started doing that about 2016 or 17. They discovered they were not welcome in the institutions in which they were teaching because they were going against the new religion of the day. And if you reject the religion, you are labeled a heretic and will be punished severely for your heresies. And so they discovered, to their shock and surprise, that their best allies were Christian apologists and philosophers. And so they started working with Christian apologists and philosophers in this battle. They're still atheist or agnostic, but they're going, we need to do this to rescue the culture from where it's going. Peter Boghossian has gone around with my friend Dr. Corey Miller, who will be speaking at the conference. Corey Miller is a former fourth-generation Mormon. He's a philosopher, authored several great books. He's got a new book coming out in October dealing with these issues. And they would go to university campuses and have a discussion, a little debate sort of back and forth on the stage. And the students were shocked over several things. One, they could comfortably sit in the same room and disagree agreeably. That surprised them. Don't we have to burn down buildings if we disagree with somebody? No, you can disagree and still be friends. You can even go out to lunch. You can care for each other's families. It's an amazing thing. So they've been doing that and dealing with the issues in universities, which Corey Miller is president of Ratio Christi, which is a ministry on college campuses. They do an amazing job. Paganism began reasserting itself and reenchantment not only in culture, but in the church as well. We really see it everywhere. You just don't really recognize it sometimes. Sometimes it's because it's not in your particular church, but it's in the broader church at large. In fact, now that I think about it, I didn't mention this earlier, but if you think about even how Christianity transformed architecture, if you look at churches even 150 years ago, they were built for a purpose of glorifying God. And you see it in the architecture, in the songs, in the way that they did their music. It is all directed toward how do I worship God. Today we have churches that are built to make man comfortable. We don't want to have them sing anything, say anything, cite anything, or give anything. We don't want any Christian symbols because they might be offended. Maybe they need to be offended. Because this is about God. This is not about you. So anyway, that's a different kind of a thing. I don't want to go down that trail too much. Paganism is reasserting itself. Dr. Peter Jones put out a book in 2001. We had already been writing on this for a while, so we were glad when we saw this, called Pagans in the Pews. And in the description, if you go online, here's what the book looks like, Pagans in the Pews. Peter Jones is interesting. He's also a philosopher. And he was good friends with a little-known musician by the name of John Lennon. They went to school together and jumped the fence together to go down to the cafe to eat lunch and stuff like that. So pretty interesting stories. He wrote this, Pagans in the Pews, and the description says this: within a single generation, Judeo-Christian America has become a breeding ground for the new paganism. Behind the dazzling diversity of pro-choice culture, abortion, rights, the homosexual agenda, radical feminism, New Age spirituality, goddess worship, and witchcraft lies a coherent pagan spirituality bent on absolute control of our culture and intolerant of any truth that stands in opposition of its teachings. You're a heretic if you question the new religion. I recall, and you may or may not have seen this, we used to have a Christian, quote-unquote, television station, TV 38, and they had an interview with she was Presbyterian, and they were engaged, they had a conference going on where they were going to rename God. And it was a goddess group in the Presbyterian Church of America, I think it was. And so it doesn't matter what you call God, but we need the feminist God. And so we're going to rename God according to our belief system. And they allowed it to happen in churches. So he's warning about that. We're seeing this happen. Even as Peter Jones was published his book, Brian McLaren, anyone heard of Brian McLaren? And the Progressive Church were transforming evangelicalism in the mega churches, especially under the theological guidance of Franciscan monk Richard Rohr. When Willow Creek hired Aaron Nyquist to lead worship in early 2000s, almost immediately coming on staff, on his personal page, he said this: Richard Rohr has transformed my understanding of Christianity far more than I ever knew would happen. Well, Richard Rohr would transform your view of Christianity because he's not a Christian. He's a panentheist. He believes that the creation was the first incarnation of the Christ. It's a Christ consciousness, a Christ spirit. And God is bigger than the universe, but he lives in and through everything. So when you touch the podium, you're touching God. When you touch my computer, you're touching God. So everything is infused with God. He's in and through everything. Willow Creek was promoting Richard Rohr. Contemplative prayer. They were paganizing their church is what they were doing. Pew Research and other researchers are observing the same trend. And there's a article I would recommend. It's by Daniel Davidson, titled "America Becoming Less Christian is a Problem for Everyone." Interesting title. And he says this about the Pew poll that he was commenting on. There's much more to unpack in the Pew survey, like the decline of Christianity occurring simultaneously with a growth in spirituality, which suggests the future of the West will not be one of atheistic secular materialism, but of re-enchantment and neo-paganism. See, the fight for the church has been for a long time against atheism. But atheism is now kind of a distraction because that is passé. They're not buying into atheism. They're buying into neo-paganism, the age of re-enchantment. And it is coming into the churches through things like contemplative prayer, witchcraft. Now, some people are concerned when I said I was on in the mid-1990s, I was on a radio talk show, Sandy Rios, you might remember Sandy Rios. And in between, we're kind of talking about Wicca because we go hang out with Wiccans. I want to know what they believe. I want to talk to them about the faith. And so I was talking about that, and I said, we have Wicca in the church. And she goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, word faith. And she was just going to break, and she said, when we come back, you better say something really good, really fast, because I'm worried. So we came back, and I said, okay, so think about this. Wicca is the attempt to cause the universe to transform through spoken spell and incantation to your will. What is word faith? It is the attempt to cause the universe to transform to your will based on speaking faith-filled words. The words are the containers of a force that you are exhibiting to cause God to transform the world to conform to your spoken word. It is Wicca. They are the same thing. And you have things like tarot cards in word faith churches. They don't call them tarot cards, they call them destiny cards. But it's the same thing. In Romans 1:23 through 27, Paul laid out what Peter Jones explains as the three-step exchange that we have seen take place. Number one, verse 23, we make a thought exchange. We worship the glory of the immortal God, or exchange the glory of the immortal God for the images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. Romans 1:23 and 1:24. Second, we make a worship exchange. Verse 25, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. The third one, we make a sexual exchange. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. This really explains the whole transgender movement, because they are opposed to God's creation, and they are recreating themselves as they want to be, to imagine themselves to create the utopia that they want, which is not the one that God has laid out for them. So it's a spiritual battle that they are fighting, and many of them don't necessarily even realize it. I know many Christians don't realize it. We're trying to deal with the external manifestations of what we're seeing, but it's a spiritual battle that's being fought, and we don't really realize it. Many of us have witnessed these exchanges occurring over our lives. Another one is Gaia worship. Has anyone heard of Gaia worship? The worship of the earth. It's a big thing, functioning under the name climate change. This began in earnest on April 22, 1970. We know the day of the birth of this movement. About 20 million Americans were participated in what was called Earth Day. It was the first Earth Day. They actually created teaching materials that were used in colleges and grade schools to teach them what they said in the pamphlet is the religion replacing Christianity. Because the earth is in danger because Christians have destroyed the planet. And so we are going to recreate it and help heal Mom. When I go to the Parliament of World Religions, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I go to the Parliament of World Religions, happens every 3 to 5 years, where you have pretty much all of the religions on the planet in one location. It's a great place for someone who's evangelizing, because they're already open to spiritual discussions. Yeah. And Gaia is central in nearly everything they do. They even have little post offices where you can write notes to Mom, and you can leave them there. I don't know where they send them to, but, letters to Mom, where you can apologize for treating her badly, and you know that she's suffering, and you're working to help to heal Mom. And they are so invested in this, and it is everywhere you go. Every workshop you attend has something to that. Human life was devalued in 1973 when the Supreme Court legalized abortion nationally with the Roe v. Wade decision. This was essentially based on 4 criteria. They are that the unborn is too small. It's a size problem. They are not developed enough. It's a development problem. It is a location problem, the environment. Where do they live, inside the womb versus outside the womb? And so as you start looking through these things that they are really basing it on, we can ask legitimate questions. Well, if it's a size problem, that person over there is definitely shorter than I am, so I deserve to live more than they do because they're too short. See, that's your problem. You're too short. Maybe less developed. Maybe they are mentally handicapped or something like that. They are therefore less mentally developed and not as worthy of life as I am, for example. They live in the wrong place. We could just pass a law that says, okay, everyone who lives in Roselle doesn't have a right to live because it's a location problem. They don't think these things through, but that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's those criteria that are causing the problem. On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, and it's ruling in the Oberfeld v. Hodges case. The LGBTQA++, keep adding it on, movement became normalized soon after that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to live however they want to live. In our country, they clearly have that right. They can even be good neighbors. If they keep their grass cut, I'm kind of good with that. But they are clearly going against the image of God as He created them. Their war is with God. It's really not with any of us. What each of us have in common is a rejection of God's creation and man staking their claim on their temple that they are creating in spiritual practices. When we attended the 1993 Parliament of World Religions, Wicca in the U.S. was relatively small. There was 3 or 4 Wiccan groups. We spent time with all of them, had a fascinating time talking with Lady Olivia, who founded the Fellowship of Isis, and people from the Covenant of the Goddess. And we got to understand what they believe and why they believe it and where they fled, most of them from churches, to engage in these belief systems. But they made sort of a beach stand right there. They are becoming normalized, and so you'll have them as your friends and neighbors now. Interesting article in a November 18, 2018 Newsweek article titled "Number of Witches Rises Dramatically Across U.S. as Millennials Reject Christianity." The number of witches and American practicing Wicca religious rituals increased dramatically since the 1990s, with several recent studies indicating there may be at least 1.5 million witches across the country. A Trinity College study conducted in 1990 estimated about 8,000 Wiccans in the U.S. And the increase has led by a rejection. 8,000. 1.5 million in 1990 was 8,000 or so. Led to an increase by rejection of mainstream Christianity among young Americans, as well as a rise in occultism. It's literally everywhere. We ran out of them, but our associate, Marcia Montenegro, did a book called Spellbound, dealing with how young kids are being recruited into occultism through the books they read, the games they play, the TV they watch, and parents are unaware that this is happening as they're being recruited into this idea. I suppose that number is greatly increased today. I'm sure it is. When we attended Paganicon 2025, which happens near Minneapolis, a little town called Plymouth, Minnesota, in an area that they lovingly call Paganistan, because there are so many pagans living there, there was 1,000 at the conference. Last year was the same, about 1,000. And there are witches, druids, Wiccans, Satanists. Well over 90% of them, we discovered, left Christian churches and are what the leadership call in spiritual recovery. They were a little concerned with our presence there. We've been there for the last 4 or 5 years, but they were a little concerned this year, and so the leader kind of took us off to the side to talk to us to find out, what are you doing here? Who are you? And we had a great conversation. We have been thinking about maybe doing a workshop there. I don't know if they'll let us, but most of them left churches, many of them from church groups like the ones they grew up in Bill Gothard's teachings. So when we talk with them and ask them to describe the God you're rejecting, I want to know. And they describe the God they're rejecting, my almost immediate response is, I would reject that God too. Because it's not the God of Scripture that they're telling us about. It's some other false understanding of who God, the God of the Bible, is. So the dazzling diversity of pro-choice, pro-culture, rights and homosexual agenda, radical feminism, New Age spirituality, as well as Eastern mysticism is growing in the church. What is the draw? It's simple because it's fulfilling the three great desires of humanity. To be as God, to be masters of meaning and destiny, and to build heaven on earth. So we could ask the question, so what? What do I do with that? Should I just be depressed and go home depressed? No, I don't think so. I think we have a real answer. It does seem overwhelming sometimes. I know it bothers Joy more than it bothers me. But we have a little bit different view of this because I actually am out there far more than she is in these environments where I get to talk to these people that have left the church. And I find that if I ask the right questions, they're pretty open to discussion. Tom Holland well described the culture in which the church was born. It was a culture very much like the one we currently live in. And we find that right now it's being transformed back into the first century culture. So if we want to know how to react and how to respond, it seems to me we want to go back to the starting point. To go back to what was it that the Christians were doing in a pagan culture where you could have as many deities as they had pantheons of gods you could choose from. The one you were not supposed to choose from was Christianity. You could be executed for that. And they said, okay. And they stood tall and firm on what the faith was. They didn't just, though, get out in culture and shake their sanctified finger at them. They did something else. They cared for the poor. They cared for the abused. They took them in and cared for them. When a Roman would leave the child in the park because they didn't want to keep it, they would go pick it up and adopt it and raise it for their own. It was an amazing time. But Paul says this in 1 Corinthians. He's writing to a church in the middle of a pagan city, in the middle of a pagan culture. And he says, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. 2 Corinthians 5:20. So here's the deal, class. This is an embassy. It's not just a church. This is an embassy. This is where you come for safety and encouragement. This is come where you are trained to be ambassadors to an adversarial culture. They don't want to hear what you have to say. And so as an ambassador, your task is to ask the right questions, to live in a way that they see you are living differently than the culture, that you care for one another even if they disagree with you, that as husbands you treat your wives as Christ treated the church and loved her and gave himself for her. You are serving her. You're not ordering her around. So you have the choice of pagan marriages or Christian biblical marriages. We should live Christian biblical marriages. Our task is to represent the King in word and deed. We share the gospel as an invitation to transfer their citizenship from being separated from God to calling on the name of Jesus and being born again. When they do, according to Colossians 1:13, they, like us, are delivered from the domain of darkness to the domain of light, to the kingdom of light. Being a Christian in the age of re-enchantment today is not really all that different from the first century Christians living in a pagan culture, except that many today who want to hold on to the biblical morality and ethics while rejecting the God from whom they came is a problem, because you cannot hold on to the morals and ethics of God without God. He is the strength of that. If you abandon God, you can't hold on to the morals and ethics. So this is the embassy, and you are the ambassadors. Your task is, when you leave the door, to share the gospel. The ministry of the church is caring for one another, training, educating. Pastor's job is to guard the door to make sure false teachers aren't coming in, and anyone inside who's imbibed on false teachings that starts sharing it, to address that so they don't rise up from within. Once you go out the door, you should be equipped and ready as ambassadors to represent the King. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to have just a brief look at where culture is at. Many around us are becoming enchanted, re-enchanted with false teaching, false beliefs, the idea that they can make up their own truth and it's still true. We ask, Lord, that you would give us grace to speak with them, to care for them, not just to have a notch on our belt of salvation, but to genuinely care for the lost, that they may come to the faith. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.